The Galactic Educational Consortium had, in its infinite wisdom and approximately 12,000 years of experience, determined that education was the cornerstone of civilization. They'd built academies on 1,700 worlds, established curriculum standards that would make any bureaucrat weep with joy, and created a system so refined that species from opposite ends of the galaxy could sit in the same classroom and learn about quantum mechanics without anyone getting confused. Or, more importantly, Eton. Zenith Academy orbited a pleasant Class G star in the Andromeda sector, a massive structure of crystalline spires and anti-grav platforms that housed approximately 40,000 students from 217 different species. It was, by all accounts, the Harvard of space, the Yale of the cosmos, the Oxford of, well, you get the idea. Getting accepted here meant something. It meant your species had achieved a certain level of sophistication. It meant you'd mastered faster-than-light travel, established diplomatic relations, and most crucially, learned to use a toilet that worked for 17 different biological configurations. The Academy prided itself on diversity. Walk down any corridor and you'd see the Velcorians, with their 6 arms taking notes simultaneously. The phosphine who communicated through bioluminescent displays rippling across their transparent skin. And the Krath who looked like ambulatory crystals and had to be careful not to refract light into anyone's eyes during lectures. It was a beautiful thing, really. Proof that intelligence and civilization could emerge from any genetic template the universe threw at a primordial soup, which made the arrival of Earth's first exchange student all the more interesting. The human had arrived on a Tuesday, which seemed cosmically appropriate, given that Tuesdays were when most catastrophically bad decisions were made throughout history. She stood at average height for her species, bipedal, binocular vision, the standard mammalian configuration that half the galaxy seemed to have independently evolved because apparently the universe had a template and wasn't afraid to use it. Brown hair pulled back in what their species called a ponytail, wearing the standard Academy uniform that had been specially fabricated to accommodate her uniquely fragile biology, and carrying a bag that looked like it had been through some kind of localized war. The administration had made a big deal about it, naturally. First contact with Earth had been established only 5 cycles ago, and the humans were still in that awkward phase of galactic citizenship where they'd figured out FTL travel by essentially strapping a bomb to their ships and riding the explosion, but hadn't quite grasped concepts like "don't eat the ambassador" or "some plants are sentient and don't appreciate being decorated with lights during your winter festivals." Professor Zelnak, the Trimonian who served as student integration coordinator, had given a speech about understanding and cultural exchange that had put half the assembly to sleep. The human had stood there with a facial expression that the translation software couldn't quite parse, but seemed to suggest she was experiencing something between amusement and the deep existential dread of someone who'd made terrible life choices. Her name was unpronounceable by most species standards, something with too many hard consonants that made the Velcorians' translator implants spark unpleasantly. She'd told everyone to just call her Max, which was apparently short for something even longer and more consonant-heavy. Because humans loved nothing more than taking perfectly good names and butchering them into abbreviated nonsense. The student body's initial reaction ranged from curious to dismissive. The Velcorians, who considered themselves the academic elite of the Academy, regarded her with a sort of polite disinterest they reserved for species who'd only recently figured out calculus. The Yithrin, a species of elegant, elongated beings who moved like liquid silk, whispered among themselves in frequency ranges most couldn't hear. And then there were the Kryn. The Kryn were, in the social hierarchy of Zenith Academy, what every high school in every civilization inevitably produced: the bullies. They stood 7 feet tall on digitigrade legs, had 4 arms ending in 3-fingered hands, and heads that looked like someone had tried to sculpt a predator from nightmares and gave up halfway through. They came from a world where they sat comfortably at the top of the food chain, had developed technology while most species were still figuring out fire, and had never really gotten over the superiority complex that came from being really, really good at hitting things. Their leader, a specimen named Volkath, had the kind of personality that suggested his parents had looked at their newborn and thought, yes, this one will definitely demand to speak to the manager. He held court in the main commons area, surrounded by his crew of equally pleasant individuals, and ruled over his little domain with the sort of petty tyranny that would have made middle management across the galaxy nod in recognition. When Max walked past their usual table on her first day, Volkath had looked up from his meal of still-twitching Garion marsh beetles and smiled. Well, his species didn't technically smile, but their jaws could unhinge in a way that showed all their teeth, which achieved roughly the same threatening effect. "Look," he'd announced to his table, making sure his voice carried across the cafeteria. "They let the primitives in now. What's next? Accepting applications from species who still think the stars are holes in the sky?" His crew had laughed, that braying sound the Kryn made when they found something amusing. Max had glanced over, made eye contact for exactly 1 second, and then continued to the food dispensers as if nothing had happened. This, as anyone who'd ever dealt with bullies could attest, was absolutely the wrong response. Ignoring them wasn't a solution, it was an invitation. The harassment started small, as these things always did. Accidentally bumping into her in corridors, making loud comments about primitive species when she entered a room, switching her gravity settings in the adaptive furniture so she'd sit down and suddenly weigh 3 times as much. Standard bully playbook, really, refined over millions of years of evolution across hundreds of worlds, because apparently being a jerk was a universal constant. Max took it all with a kind of patience that the other students found baffling. She'd get bumped, steady herself, and keep walking. She'd hear the comments, pause for the briefest moment like she was considering something, and then continue on. She'd sit in a chair suddenly calibrated for Kryn gravity, grunt slightly as her weight tripled, and just sit there eating her lunch like nothing was wrong. This, predictably, only made Volkath escalate. Bullies were like scientists in that regard. If the experiment didn't produce results, they simply increased the variables until something broke. By the end of the first week, the other students had started to notice patterns. The human didn't socialize much, kept to herself, studied in corners of the library where the gravity was set to galactic standard. She excelled in theoretical courses, particularly anything involving physics or spatial mathematics, which surprised exactly no one because even primitive species could occasionally grasp basic concepts. What was odd was her complete lack of reaction to provocation. The Velcorians, who observed everything with the detached interest of a species that considered gossip beneath them, but absolutely engaged in it anyway, noted that the humans seemed to assess every situation before responding. The Yithrin, who were empathic enough to sense emotional states, reported that her emotional signature was weird, constantly alert in a way that suggested either paranoia or predatory awareness, and they couldn't quite tell which. Dr. Zelnak, monitoring the situation as per her responsibilities, had filed 3 separate reports expressing concern. The Academy's response had been the institutional equivalent of a shrug. The human wasn't complaining. The Kryn weren't technically breaking any rules. Let it play out, they said, as if social dynamics were a spectator sport. The turning point came during xenobiology class. Professor Tharn was a crystalline, which meant he was literally a sentient rock formation who communicated through controlled sound vibrations. He was teaching a unit on adaptive evolution, specifically how species developed survival mechanisms in response to environmental pressures. It was fascinating stuff, the kind of material that made you appreciate the sheer ridiculous creativity of natural selection. Consider, Tharn vibrated, his crystalline structure refracting light into a display showing various worlds. The Yithrin homeworld, predators hunted by sound. The Yithrin evolved to move silently, to speak in frequencies above and below the predator's range. Elegant, efficient. He shifted displays. The Velkorians developed on a world with low gravity and dense forests. 6 arms for maximum grip, eyes that can track movement in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Logical adaptations. Another shift. The Kryn homeworld had megafauna predators that could crush stone. They evolved armor plating, redundant organs, and aggression as a survival trait. Each species is a product of its environment's challenges. Volkath had preened at that last part, which was impressive considering his species didn't have feathers. The implication was clear. The Kryn were tough because they'd had to be. Predators bred strength. Now, Tharn continued, and here's where things got interesting. Let's examine Earth, our newest member species homeworld. Class M planet seems pleasant enough. Standard gravity, adequate atmosphere, reasonable temperature range. On the surface, not particularly challenging. He pulled up a display of Earth, a blue-green marble that looked downright peaceful. However, Tharn's vibrations took on an almost ominous quality. Upon closer examination, Earth presents a unique case study in hostile environmental conditions masquerading as habitability. The class leaned in. Even Volkath looked interested, probably hoping for ammunition to mock the human with. Earth rotates at approximately 460 meters per second at the equator. This creates weather systems of extraordinary violence. Hurricanes, tornadoes, storms that can level entire settlements. A few students glanced at Max, who was taking notes with the kind of focus that suggested this was review material. The planet experiences regular seismic activity. The crust is broken into plates that constantly shift, causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Entire civilizations have been destroyed by these events. More glances. Max kept writing. The gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared, which is on the higher end of habitable range. The atmospheric pressure at sea level is 101 kilopascals. Combined, these create an environment that would be considered extreme by most species standards. Tharn was just getting started, and you could feel the energy in the room shifting. But the truly remarkable aspect is the ecosystem. Earth has more biodiversity than any other known Class M planet. This includes approximately 375,000 species of plants, many of which are toxic. It includes bacteria and viruses that have driven selection pressures for millions of years. The humans have immune systems that function as internal warfare states, constantly fighting off invasions. A Velkorian raised an appendage. Professor, surely that's an exaggeration? Not remotely. Human immune systems maintain standing armies of specialized cells that identify, target, and destroy foreign organisms. They develop new responses to novel threats. It's essentially biological warfare happening inside their bodies at all times. The class was starting to look uncomfortable. Max still hadn't looked up from her notes. And then, Tharn's vibrations carried an edge that might have been amusement if rocks could be amused. There's the fauna. Earth has preserved what most worlds lost during their development. Apex predators, plural, multiple species that sit at the top of food chains. The display shifted, showing various Earth creatures. Crocodilians with bite forces that exceed most industrial equipment. Ursines that can weigh 800 kilograms and run at 56 kilometers per hour. Felines with retractable claws and hunting instincts refined over millions of years. Marine predators with electroreception and teeth that regrow indefinitely. But surely, another student ventured, the humans evolved to avoid these creatures. Tharn made a sound that definitely conveyed amusement now. No. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. They didn't avoid predators. They outlasted prey by chasing it until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies are designed for endurance. They can regulate temperature through liquid secretion, meaning they can operate in conditions that would cause other species to overheat. They can go days without water, weeks without food, and their bones can take impact forces that would shatter most other species' skeletons. The room had gone very quiet. Max finally looked up, caught several students staring at her, and raised an eyebrow in an expression that her face seemed specifically designed to make. I should note, Tharn continued, completely oblivious to the social dynamics he was destroying, that Earth is classified in xenobiological databases as a Class 12 Deathworld. There are only 37 known planets in that category. Most species consider them unsuitable for colonization without extensive terraforming. Volkath, who'd been getting progressively quieter, finally spoke up. That has to be propaganda. They're trying to make their world sound more dangerous than it is. Max set down her stylus. When she spoke, her voice had a casual quality that somehow made everything worse. Last summer, I went camping in what we call the Australian outback. Got bitten by a spider about this big. She held up her fingers about an inch apart. Had to hike 8 kilometers to get to a med station. Took 3 days to feel normal again. A spider, one of the Velcorians repeated, voice flat. A small arachnid nearly killed you. Oh, it wouldn't have killed me. Probably. Just would have been really unpleasant. The box jellyfish, though, those will definitely kill you. And the snakes. And the octopi, but only the blue-ringed ones. And the snails. Come to think of it, a lot of things in Australia will kill you. This is one region? Tharn asked, genuinely interested now. One continent. We've got 6 others, each with their own stuff that wants you dead. Different flavors of death, really. Africa's got big things that'll step on you. South America's got tiny things that'll poison you. North America's got things that'll maul you. Asia's got a mix of everything. Antarctica will just freeze you. Europe's relatively safe. But they used to have wolves and bears everywhere before we killed most of them. The phrase, "before we killed most of them," hung in the air like a threat. You eliminated your apex predators? A student asked. Not eliminated. Reduced. Managed. We're working on conservation now, trying to bring populations back. Turns out ecosystems need predators. We learned that the hard way. Volkath's face had done something complicated. You're saying your species actively hunted the creatures that hunted you? Max shrugged. A gesture her species seemed to use for everything from agreement to complete dismissal. I mean, yeah, they ate our livestock, our children. We had tools and numbers, so... Another shrug. We're actually pretty good at killing things when we need to be. The class ended shortly after, but the damage was done. Students left looking at the human with new eyes. Volkath and his crew huddled together, having what appeared to be an intense discussion. Max packed up her materials and headed to her next class, completely unaware that she'd just fundamentally altered her social standing. The real test came 3 days later during physical education. Zenith Academy maintained variable gravity chambers for exercise and training. Different species required different conditions to maintain optimal health, and the chambers could be programmed for anything from the 0.3 G environment the Yithrin preferred to the crushing 2.1 G that Kryn considered comfortable. Standard protocol was to exercise in your species' preferred gravity. Humans, according to their file, had evolved in 1G. The gym instructor, a pragmatic Velkorian named Tresh, had set up a basic circuit training course at Galactic Standard, which was 0.8 G, assuming the human would appreciate the easier conditions. Max had politely asked if she could train at 1G instead. Earth Standard, she'd said, was what her body was used to. Tresh had agreed, slightly bemused. Most species jumped at the chance to exercise in lower gravity. This is where Volkath made his biggest mistake. He'd been using the chamber next to the humans, set to a comfortable 2.1 G for his Kryn physiology. Through the transparent wall, he watched her go through exercises that looked deceptively simple. Running, jumping, lifting weights that seemed modest by most standards. She was sweating, that weird liquid excretion thing she'd mentioned, and her face had turned red in a way that suggested cardiovascular exertion. She looked weak, struggling, exactly what he'd expected from a species that had barely figured out FTL travel. An idea formed. A terrible, wonderful, awful idea. "Hey," called through the comm system. "Human, Max." She paused mid-exercise, breathing hard. "Yeah? You're training at 1G, right? Earth Standard?" "That's right. Seems easy. I train at 2.1 G, builds real strength." He made sure his crew, who'd gathered to watch, could hear him clearly. "But I'm curious. Could a human even function in Kryn gravity? Or would you just collapse?" It was a challenge. An obvious, stupid challenge that anyone with sense would decline. Max looked at him through the transparent wall, chest still heaving from exertion. And something crossed her face that might have been calculation or might have been amusement. With humans, it was hard to tell. "You want me to try exercising in 2.1 G?" she asked. "If you can. No shame in admitting your species is too weak." Hook, line, and sinker. Max nodded slowly. "Sure, why not?" Tresh tried to intervene. "That's not advisable. Your skeletal structure isn't designed for—" "I'll be careful," Max said. Which should have been everyone's first warning that something was about to go very wrong. She reset her chamber to 2.1 G. The moment it kicked in, the effect should have been immediate and devastating. She weighed, essentially, twice what she normally did. Every movement should have required enormous effort. Her bones should have creaked under the stress. She should have collapsed. Instead, Max grunted slightly, adjusted her stance, and started her exercises again. It wasn't graceful. She moved like someone walking through water, every action requiring visible effort and concentration. But she moved. She ran, slower than before, but still ran. She jumped, barely clearing a few inches, but still jumped. She lifted weights that at 2.1 G should have been impossible for her physiology, and she lifted them. Volkath's jaw had gone slack. His crew had stopped jeering and started doing calculations on their data pads, trying to figure out if what they were seeing was actually possible. "How?" Tresh whispered. "Is she not injured?" One of the Velkorian students who'd been paying attention in xenobiology pulled up their notes. "Human bones," they said in class. "Human bones can take impact forces that would shatter other species. They're not just solid. They're designed with internal structures. Lightweight, but incredibly strong. But the muscle strain alone. They're endurance hunters. Their muscles are designed for extended activity. And they mentioned the immune system, the healing factor. Humans are apparently very good at not dying. Max finished her set, reset the gravity to 1G, and stood there catching her breath. Through the wall, she looked at Volkath and gave him a thumbs up, a gesture that her species apparently used to indicate success or, in context, a very polite "screw you." "Your turn," she said. "Want to try 1G, since Kryn gravity is so much harder?" It was petty. It was unnecessary. It was absolutely perfect. Volkath, pride wounded and dignity in tatters, reset his chamber to 1G. The Kryn had evolved in heavy gravity, and their bodies were designed for it. In lower gravity, they became faster, stronger, more dangerous. This should have been a cakewalk. He lasted 4 minutes before overextending, moving too fast for his momentum calculations and slamming face first into a piece of equipment. The chamber's safety systems kicked in, returning him to his preferred gravity while medical alerts started blaring. Max had watched the entire thing with an expression of polite concern. "Is he okay?" she asked Tresh. "Bruised ego mostly, possibly a fractured jaw plate. He'll heal." Tresh looked at her with new respect. That was impressive, inadvisable, possibly reckless, but impressive. "Thanks. I should probably mention 2.1G isn't actually that bad. We've got training facilities on Earth that go higher for military conditioning. I've trained at 2.5G before." She said this casually, like she was discussing the weather. "Couldn't do it for long periods, but it's doable." Tresh made a note on her datapad. A long note, possibly a novel. The news spread through the Academy like wildfire, which was a universal constant even in species that didn't use fire. The human, the supposedly weak primitive from a backwater world, had not only survived Kryn-level gravity, but had functioned in it. And she'd done it while making Volkath look like an idiot, which was the cherry on top of the cosmic irony sundae. Students started researching Earth with new intensity. What they found didn't help the growing sense of unease. Earth had a moon, a relatively large one, that created tidal forces which had driven evolution in complex ways. It had a magnetosphere that protected against cosmic radiation, but still allowed enough through to increase mutation rates. It had an axis tilt that created seasons, forcing species to adapt to temperature variations. It had oceans with pressure at depth that would crush most spacecraft, and things lived down there. The more they dug, the worse it got. Humans had evolved not just to survive their world, but to dominate it. They'd spread across every continent, adapted to every climate, and had done it all before they'd even discovered agriculture. They'd survived ice ages, volcanic winters, plague pandemics that killed significant portions of their population, and had kept going. And the Academy had let one into their school, had let her walk around with other species, had basically given the bullies a target without mentioning that the target might actually be a predator in disguise. The final incident happened in the cafeteria 2 weeks later. Volkath, recovered and desperate to salvage his reputation, decided on one last attempt at dominance. He cornered Max near the food dispensers, flanked by his 2 largest crew members. The cafeteria went quiet, that universal hush when violence was about to happen. "You embarrassed me," he growled, all 4 arms flexing in threat display. Max looked up at him, holding a tray of food that looked like it would poison most species. "That wasn't my intention." "Don't care about intentions. Care about respect. You're going to apologize, in front of everyone." "Or what?" It was a simple question, delivered without aggression or fear, just curiosity. Volkath took it as defiance. He reached out with one of his 4 arms to grab her shoulder, probably planning to intimidate her with his strength. It was a standard bully move, refined across species and millennia. Grab, squeeze, dominate. His hand never made contact. Max moved. Not fast by human standards, probably, but fast enough. She shifted her weight, angled her body, and Volkath's arm met empty air. His momentum carried him forward, off balance, and Max simply stepped aside. The movement was so economical, so precisely calculated, that it looked effortless. Volkath stumbled, caught himself, and spun around with rage burning in his eyes. "You!" He tried to grab her again. Max's hand came up, caught his wrist, and twisted. Not with strength, with leverage. With technique that spoke of training that had nothing to do with academic pursuits. Volkath's arm bent in a direction arms weren't supposed to bend, and he made a sound that his species reserved for significant pain. "Stop," Max said, voice still calm. "This is stupid. I don't want to hurt you." "You can't." Volkath tried to free his arm, realized he couldn't, and did the worst possible thing. He swung with another arm, a clumsy blow driven by panic and pride. Max let go of his wrist, ducked under the swing, and hit him. Once. A short, sharp strike to his center mass with the palm of her hand. The sound echoed through the cafeteria. Volkath's eyes went wide. He staggered back, all four arms clutching his thorax, trying to breathe. His armor plating, which could supposedly withstand strikes from megafauna, had just met human anatomy. Human hands, someone whispered, pulling up biology data. Have 27 bones. They can form fists, strike with the equivalent of 400 newtons of force. That's not possible for their size. Max stood there, tray still in her other hand, looking faintly embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I trained in martial arts as a kid. Krav Maga. It's mostly defensive, but..." She shrugged, that universal human gesture. Instinct kicked in. Volkath was being helped up by his crew, still struggling to breathe. He looked at Max like she'd just revealed herself to be something from his species' ancestral nightmares. Security arrived. Too late as always. They assessed the situation, interviewed witnesses, and reached the conclusion that was obvious to everyone. Volkath had initiated. Max had defended. Case closed. What wasn't closed was the new social dynamic. Students gave Max a wide berth after that. Not hostile, but wary. The kind of space you gave something you'd previously thought was harmless, but had just revealed very capable teeth. The Velkorians started treating her with the respect they showed professors. The Yithrin included her in their study groups, but were careful not to touch her. Even species that hadn't witnessed the cafeteria incident heard about it and adjusted accordingly. Max seemed confused by the change. She'd just defended herself, something that seemed perfectly reasonable to her. The idea that other species would find it terrifying hadn't occurred to her because, from a human perspective, she'd shown remarkable restraint. She could have broken his arm. She could have struck his head. She could have done significantly more damage, and she hadn't. That restraint, that calculated choice to use minimum necessary force, was somehow more frightening than if she'd lost control. Dr. Zelnak called Max in for a meeting 3 days later. The office was comfortable, designed to accommodate multiple species, with furniture that adjusted and lighting that could shift spectrums. "Please sit," Zelnak said, gesturing to a chair. Max sat, looking like a student called to the principal's office, which was essentially what this was. "I want to discuss the incident with Volkath. I didn't mean to hurt him. He grabbed me, I reacted." "I know. The recording was clear. You're not in trouble." Zelnak paused, considering her words. "I'm curious, though. Your file mentions martial arts training. Could you elaborate?" Max shrugged. "I started when I was 8. My parents thought it would be good for discipline and self-defense. Krav Maga, Some Muay Thai, a bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Trained through high school. You trained to fight for 10 years. I trained to not need to fight. That's the whole point. You learn what your body can do so you don't have to use it. She paused. Is that not normal here? No. Most civilized species eliminated physical combat millennia ago. Disagreements are settled through debate, mediation, legal systems. The concept of training specifically to harm others is considered barbaric. Max's face did something complicated. We do all that too. The training is for when talking doesn't work, or when someone's trying to hurt you and you need to stop them without killing them. It's not about offense, it's about options. But you could have killed Volkath. It wasn't a question. Max didn't deny it. Yes, easily. Humans are actually really good at killing things. We've had a lot of practice. She said it matter-of-factly, like discussing a homework assignment. But I didn't want to. I just wanted him to stop grabbing me. Zelnak made more notes. I'm going to be honest with you. Your presence here has been educational. We've learned more about Deathworld species in 2 weeks than in the previous century. But I need to ask, do you feel safe here? Max blinked. Safe? Yeah. Why wouldn't I? You were being harassed, bullied. Oh, that. Max waved a hand dismissively. That's pretty mild compared to middle school on Earth. Nobody here has actually tried to hurt me. They were just testing boundaries. Volkath got handsy. I set a boundary. Now everyone knows where the lines are. You consider that mild? Look, Dr. Zelnak, I grew up on a world where the weather can kill you, the animals can kill you, the plants can kill you, and sometimes other humans will try to kill you. A few students being rude doesn't even register. It's annoying, sure, but it's not dangerous. Zelnak sat back, her facial membranes shifting in what might have been bewilderment. You don't understand what you are to them now, do you? What do you mean? They're afraid of you. Not because you hurt Volkath, because of how easily you did it. Because you're from a world that by all rights should have killed your species in its cradle, and instead you conquered it. Because every day you walk around under conditions that other species would consider oppressive, and you treat it as normal. Because your biology is designed for survival in ways they've never encountered. Max looked genuinely surprised. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I know. That's what makes it worse. You're not even trying, and you're still terrifying. The conversation ended shortly after, with Zelnak promising to add understanding human psychology to her already long list of things to research. Max left, still looking confused about the whole situation. The academy adjusted, slowly, carefully, like an organism adapting to a new element in its ecosystem. The curriculum added more content about Deathworld species. The gym established new protocols for variable gravity training. The cafeteria, perhaps most importantly, put up signs reminding students that physical intimidation was not acceptable conflict resolution. Volkath transferred to a different institution. His crew scattered, finding new social circles where they didn't have to explain why they'd tried to bully an apex predator. Other students started approaching Max with genuine curiosity instead of dismissal, asking about Earth, about human culture, about what it was like growing up on a world that was actively trying to kill you. Max answered their questions with the same patience she'd shown toward the bullying. Yes, humans kept predators as pets. Yes, they engaged in recreational activities that could result in injury or death. Yes, they consumed toxins for entertainment and called it drinking. Yes, they had entire sports dedicated to controlled combat. No, it wasn't considered weird. It was just life. The Velkorians started including human case studies in their anthropology research. the Yithrin composed symphonies inspired by human endurance. Even the Kryn, what remained of them at the Academy, developed a grudging respect for the species that had handed them their first real defeat. 3 months after her arrival, Max sat in the library working on an assignment about comparative evolutionary pressures. A Velkorian named Tesh approached, hesitant but determined. "May I ask you something?" Tesh said. Max looked up. "Sure. Do you ever regret coming here? To the Academy? After everything that happened?" Max considered the question, her face doing that thing where humans processed complex thoughts. "No," she said finally. "I mean, it was rough at first. The bullying, the gravity adjustment, figuring out which foods wouldn't give me indigestion. But I'm learning things I never could on Earth. I'm meeting people from hundreds of worlds. I'm seeing the universe from perspectives my species never imagined." She smiled, a gesture that showed her teeth in a way that still made Tesh slightly uncomfortable. "Plus, I kind of like being the scary one for once. Back home, I was just average." "Average," Tesh repeated. "You're average for your species." "Pretty much. I'm not particularly strong or fast by human standards. I'm decent at martial arts, but not competitive level. I'm smart enough to get into this academy, but there are billions of humans smarter. I'm just normal." Tesh made a note on her data pad. "If you're normal, what are your exceptional members like?" Max's smile widened. "You probably don't want to know." But Tesh did want to know. They all did. Because the revelation that humans were not just survivors, but thriving survivors, not just strong, but casually strong, not just dangerous, but carefully controlled dangerous, had fundamentally altered galactic perspective. The Galactic Educational Consortium updated its classification systems. Deathworld species were no longer considered primitive or underdeveloped. They were recognized as having evolved under pressures that most of the galaxy couldn't fathom, developing capabilities that seemed impossible by civilized standards. Zenith Academy became the first institution to actively recruit from Deathworlds. Applications arrived from planets where the gravity crushed and the storms raged and the predators hunted. From species that had clawed their way to sentience against odds that should have been insurmountable. The Academy adapted, built new facilities, hired new professors, and slowly, carefully, learned to accommodate beings who considered hostile environment to be a baseline condition. Max graduated 4 years later, with honors in quantum mechanics and xenobiology. She gave a speech at commencement that was memorable mostly for its brevity and the part where she suggested that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy had been thinking about survival all wrong. That civilization wasn't about transcending your nature, but understanding it. That strength wasn't just physical but mental, wasn't just individual but collective. She returned to Earth afterward, planning to join the human diplomatic corps. The galaxy needed people who could bridge the gap between species who'd evolved in comfort and those who'd been forged in fire. She was, by her own assessment, uniquely qualified. Volkath, now working at a different institution, heard about her graduation through mutual contacts. He sent a message, brief and carefully worded. "Congratulations. I learned more from you than any professor. Thank you for not killing me." Max replied, "Thanks. Sorry about the ribs. Glad you're doing well." It was, by any standard, the most polite exchange between a bully and his victim in galactic history. It was also a reminder that humans, despite everything, despite being from a world that should have made them into monsters, had somehow developed empathy, restraint, and the capacity for forgiveness, which was, perhaps, the most terrifying thing about them The galaxy had spent millennia believing that civilization required comfortable conditions, that intelligence emerged from ease, that peace came from plenty. Then humans had arrived, carrying the scars of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years, and proved something the galaxy had forgotten: that the strongest steel was forged in the hottest fire, and that sometimes the scariest creatures were the ones who chose not to be scary. Zenith Academy kept a plaque in the main commons area, installed after Max graduated. It read, "Strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice not to cause it. Remember that the scariest student in Academy history never actually hurt anyone who didn't grab her first." Students would walk past it daily, this memorial to a human who'd accidentally revolutionized galactic education by simply existing. Some would pause, read it, consider the implications. Others would hurry past, still slightly uncomfortable with the reminder that they shared the universe with species who considered their own world to be merely challenging rather than impossible. And somewhere on Earth, Max would occasionally think about her time at the Academy and smile, remembering the looks on their faces when they'd realized that humans weren't weak. They were just very, very good at pretending to be, right up until the moment they decided to stop pretending. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson: never, ever assume that quiet means harmless. Sometimes quiet just means conserving energy. And sometimes the girl from the Deathworld is only scary because everyone else finally figured out what she'd been all along: a survivor from a planet of survivors, polite and patient and absolutely capable of ending you if you really truly insisted. But probably she'd rather just finish her homework and grab lunch. You know, if that was okay with everyone else.